They say some people walk past miracles every day and never notice, but he did. On a cold morning in downtown Chicago, a billionaire CEO stopped in his tracks, not because of a business call or a camera flash, but because of a woman kneeling on the frozen sidewalk, selling tiny handmade toys, with eyes full of something the world had long forgotten: love, sacrifice, and silent desperation. Hello and welcome to Stories of Hope. Today's story isn't fiction. It's about the kind of quiet strength we rarely see, and the extraordinary ripple effect of one man's decision to stop, listen, and do something no one expected. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? It all began on a weekday morning like any other. The city was alive with movement, cars honking, people rushing to work, coffee cups in hand, earbuds in. No one really paid attention to the corners, the sidewalks, the quiet figures that blended into the noise. But one woman didn't blend in, not to him, not to Richard Hallstrom. Richard Hallstrom wasn't the kind of man you'd expect to stop for anyone. He ran one of the largest tech firms in the country, with offices in 5 countries, and the kind of schedule that made sleep optional. But something about that day, something about her made him pause. She was maybe in her early 40s, wearing a faded coat 2 sizes too big. Her hands were raw from the cold, gently placing tiny wooden toys on a piece of cloth. They were beautiful, carefully painted. Dinosaurs, animals, little trucks, each one shaped with detail and care. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't begging. She just waited, hopeful, still, and sitting right beside her was a boy. The child looked no older than 10. His legs were thin, twisted in a way that told a silent story, one of pain, surgeries, maybe even paralysis. He sat in a second-hand wheelchair, wrapped in a thin blanket, smiling at people who never looked back. That's what stopped Richard. Not the toys, not the woman, but the boy's smile. It wasn't empty, it wasn't fake. It was a smile like he still believed in the goodness of people. Richard walked over. His driver stayed back, confused. No cameras, no reporters, just a man, curious and maybe, though he wouldn't admit it, searching for something. The woman looked up, startled but polite. "Toys, sir?" "Just $5 each. I made them myself." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the kind of exhaustion that builds when life hasn't given you a break in years. Richard looked at the boy. "They're beautiful," he said, picking up a tiny blue car. "Do you make these together?" The woman nodded. "He helps paint them. I carve. He colors. We work in the evenings, after my cleaning shift." He wanted to ask why they were on the street, why she wasn't at home, why the boy looked so frail, but he didn't have to. It was in her eyes. It was all there. Still, she didn't complain. She didn't tell a tragic story. She didn't ask for anything more than the cost of a toy. "What's his name?" Richard asked. "Matthew," she said, running her fingers gently through the boy's hair. "And yours?" "Sandra." He nodded slowly. "Sandra. What's really going on?" Her lips pressed tight, her eyes lowered. For a moment it looked like she wouldn't answer, but then she did. "I had to choose," she said softly, "between medication for his muscles and rent, between heating the apartment or feeding him. There's no help left, no one left, so I make toys. I sit here and I pray someone notices." Richard said nothing, just stood there, holding the tiny car. She looked at him again. "But please, sir, you don't have to buy. I know it's just toys. It's okay." But it wasn't okay, not to him. He pulled out his wallet, bought every single toy, then gave her his card. "I want to help," he said. "Not just today, but in a real way." She shook her head quickly, almost panicked. "Sir, I don't want charity. I just want to earn what I can for him, that's all." He respected that, admired it. I understand, he replied. Then help me, consult with me, teach me how to build something for parents like you. She looked confused, unsure if he was joking, but his eyes were steady, serious. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Sandra thought that would be it. Another kind man, another one-time gesture. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. That night, Richard didn't go to bed. He stayed up, scrolling through data, reading about healthcare gaps, searching for every article on disability care, small toy businesses, support groups for single mothers. He hadn't felt this kind of fire in years, not since his early startup days, and by morning he had an idea, one that would change everything. But while he was planning something bigger than she could imagine, Sandra was facing another battle, one that would test her strength to the core. That night, the temperature dropped sharply. Sandra wrapped Matthew in an extra blanket, the thin fabric barely enough to keep out the bite of the wind sneaking through the cracked window of their studio apartment. The heat had been cut off 2 days earlier. Her last paycheck from cleaning offices had gone toward a partial rent payment and a bag of groceries. There was nothing left. Matthew didn't complain. He never did. Even when his legs ached from the cold, or when his dinner was just a slice of bread with peanut butter, he smiled. "We're okay, Mama," he whispered as she tucked him in. "We have each other." Sandra kissed his forehead and held it together, just long enough to say goodnight. Then she stepped into the bathroom, closed the door, and let the tears fall. She cried quietly, like she had so many nights before, because that was the only time she allowed herself to break. Out there, in front of Matthew, she had to be strong. Always. The next morning, she was up before sunrise, preparing the toys they had finished painting the night before. She didn't expect to see the man from yesterday again. People said kind things sometimes, but kind words didn't pay bills. But across the city, in a warm, modern office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Richard Hallstrom stood in front of a whiteboard filled with notes and numbers. His executive team looked puzzled. "You want to—" "What?" one of them asked. "I want to build a program," Richard said calmly. "A new division under Hallstrom Foundation, focused on helping single parents of disabled children, especially those who want to work but can't make ends meet." The board members glanced at each other. One finally spoke up. "Richard, that's noble, but we're a tech firm. This is way off mission." "No," Richard said, voice steady. "This is the mission. Our technology has changed lives. But what's the point if we overlook the lives right in front of us?" His assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, leaned in. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Richard nodded. "I met a woman yesterday who reminded me why I started this company in the first place. To solve problems no one else was willing to solve. She has nothing, except love for her son and the will to keep going. If she had half the support I've been given in life, she'd be running her own business by now." Claire took a breath, then quietly said, "Then let's get to work." Back in Sandra's world, the morning was off to a rough start. Her usual spot on the sidewalk had been taken by a street vendor with a loudspeaker, drawing a crowd and blocking her view. She tried setting up 2 blocks away, but foot traffic was slow. Hours passed, not one sale. By late afternoon, her hands were numb. Matthew was shivering. She was about to pack up and call it a day when a black SUV pulled up beside them. The window rolled down, and there he was, Richard. He stepped out, not with a camera crew or a reporter in tow, but alone. In his hands were 2 coffee cups. "You looked cold," he said, offering one to her. "Hot chocolate for him, tea for you." Sandra hesitated, then accepted them with quiet gratitude. "I meant what I said yesterday," he told her. "I'm not offering pity, Sandra. I'm offering partnership. I want you to come work with me, Help me create something for people like you. Real solutions. You know what it's like, how the system fails, where the cracks are." "I don't have a degree," she replied softly. "I barely have time to sleep." "I don't care about degrees. I care about heart. I've got a whole building full of smart people, but I need someone who knows what it's really like out here." Sandra looked at Matthew, who gave her a quiet, hopeful smile. For the first time in months, she felt something stirring beneath the weight she carried every day. Maybe, just maybe, this could be real. She said yes. Over the next few weeks, things changed, slowly, cautiously, but surely. Richard hired her as a consultant, gave her flexible hours, and even arranged for Matthew to get physical therapy at one of the best clinics in the city, fully covered by the foundation. Sandra walked into that glass building the first day with trembling hands, but by the second week, she was contributing to planning sessions, helping draft proposals, and giving first-hand insight that no report or spreadsheet could capture. Richard watched quietly, never making a show of it. But what impressed him wasn't her ideas. It was her resilience. She showed up every day, even when her face was tired. She asked smart questions. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, people listened. One afternoon, after a long meeting, Claire approached Richard in the hallway. "You see what's happening, right?" she said. "She's not just helping us build something new. She's becoming someone new herself." Richard nodded. "No, she's becoming who she always was. The world just never gave her the chance. But while things were looking up, not everyone was happy. A local tabloid got wind of the story. Billionaire CEO hires street vendor to run charity project, and ran it with sarcasm and mockery. Online commenters tore into Sandra, accusing her of playing the victim for sympathy. Some even claimed she must have tricked him into it. It hit her hard. She stopped showing up to work, stopped answering Richard's calls. And just like that, the fear came rushing back. What if they were right? What if this life wasn't hers to live? Richard had a decision to make. Let her fade away quietly, or fight to remind her why he believed in her in the first place. So, one rainy morning, he showed up at her door. No press, no driver, just him, soaked in rain, holding a single toy in his hand, one she had made, a little painted giraffe. When she opened the door, he simply said, "You made this with love, Sandra, and you taught me something that not all the money in the world ever could. I don't want you to disappear. I want you to lead." She cried then, not out of weakness, but because for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her, and it wouldn't be the last time she'd need that strength, because a storm was coming, one that would test everything they had built and threaten to tear it all apart. The days that followed felt heavier than anything Sandra had experienced in her new life. The public criticism hadn't just stung, it had shaken something deep inside her. But after Richard's unexpected visit, after he'd stood there in the rain with that little giraffe in his hand, and not a trace of doubt in his voice, something shifted. She realized she wasn't alone anymore, not in this fight. Sandra returned to the office the next morning, head held a little higher, heart still aching, but determined not to let strangers with keyboards dictate the course of her life. The moment she stepped through those glass doors, Claire greeted her not with pity, but a warm nod and a simple, "Welcome back, we missed you." Behind the scenes, however, things were more complicated than ever. Richard's foundation was facing serious scrutiny. Investors were growing uneasy. A few board members had started asking if his involvement with Sandra was too personal. Whispers about favoritism, PR stunts, and lack of focus began circling. But Richard didn't flinch. He doubled down instead. He expanded the new outreach initiative Sandra had helped start. He put real funding behind it, not just promises. And more importantly, He insisted Sandra be the public face of it, not because of charity, but because of her voice, a voice that too many people like her never got to use. Sandra hesitated at first. She wasn't comfortable speaking to crowds. But when Richard said, "It's not about perfection, it's about truth," she agreed. The first event was held at a community center downtown. Dozens of single parents attended, many of them holding young children with disabilities. Some looked exhausted, others hopeful, but all of them listened when Sandra stepped up to the podium. She spoke slowly at first, her voice shaky, but honest. "I used to think surviving was the same as living," she said. "For years, I worked just to stay afloat. I sold toys on the street because that was the only way to keep my son warm, fed, and hopeful. I never thought someone like me would be standing here. But I am, and I'm not here because I was rescued. I'm here because someone believed in me enough to offer a chance, and because I finally believed I deserved that chance too." The applause was quiet, respectful, but in that room, eyes were shining. A few parents cried. Others approached her afterward to say thank you. One mother said, "Hearing you talk, I feel less ashamed for struggling." That night, Richard watched from the back, quietly. When Sandra finished, he stepped outside to take a call, and that's when the storm finally hit. An anonymous whistleblower had accused the Hallstrom Foundation of misusing funds. The tip claimed the outreach program, specifically Sandra's hiring, was part of an internal cover-up. It sounded ridiculous, but the media latched onto it instantly. Within 24 hours, headlines screamed, "From street vendor to scandal, is Hallstrom's charity a lie?" Social media was a war zone. Reporters camped outside Sandra's apartment. Paparazzi tried snapping photos of her and Matthew on their way to therapy. It was all too much. Matthew, confused and frightened, asked her one night, "Did we do something wrong, Mama?" Sandra hugged him tightly. "No, sweetheart, we didn't. But sometimes when people don't understand something good, they try to ruin it." Richard, meanwhile, was under intense pressure. Some investors threatened to pull out. Board members called for a pause on the new initiative. He was urged to quietly end Sandra's involvement to preserve the company's image. But Richard refused. He called an emergency press conference and did something no one expected. He brought Sandra with him. Standing before a sea of cameras, Richard spoke first. "I've built this company from the ground up, but no success has ever humbled me more than meeting Sandra and her son. The Hallstrom Foundation didn't hire her out of sympathy. We hired her because she's one of the most courageous and capable people I've ever met." Then, he stepped back. Sandra took a deep breath. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "I don't have a polished resume or a perfect past," she said. "But what I do have is experience, real experience. I know what it's like to choose between medicine and dinner. I know what it's like to be invisible. I'm not here to play a role. I'm here to make sure others like me don't fall through the cracks anymore." The silence that followed was powerful. It didn't erase the scandal overnight, but it turned the tide. Public opinion began to shift. Investigations found no wrongdoing, only a false claim made by a disgruntled former employee. The media, sensing the change in wind, started running a different headline: "A Mother's Strength, How Sandra Helped Redefine Corporate Compassion." But just when it seemed things were finally settling, another unexpected challenge arrived. Matthew's doctor delivered news Sandra never saw coming. His condition was worsening. He would need surgery, soon. The operation was delicate, risky, and expensive. Sandra sat in the hospital lobby, hands clenched, unsure of how to pay for it or whether she could watch her son go through another round of pain. She didn't want to ask Richard. She didn't want to feel like a burden again, but Richard didn't wait for her to ask. He showed up at the hospital, sat beside her, and said, "He's family now. We take care of our own." And when the day of the surgery came, Sandra waited alone in the quiet hallway, eyes red, heart pounding, until the doctor finally walked out and said the words she'd been praying to hear. "He's going to be okay." Tears of relief streamed down her face. All the battles, all the cold nights, all the judgment, it all led to this moment. Her son had a future, and for the first time in her life, so did she. But just as Sandra thought life was finally allowing her to breathe, something happened, something she never imagined. A knock at her door, a face from her past, a man who had once abandoned her and never looked back, Matthew's father. When Sandra opened the door and saw him standing there, her heart froze. It had been nearly 9 years since she'd last seen Jason, the man who once promised to love her forever, only to disappear when life got hard. When their baby boy was diagnosed and medical bills piled up, Jason chose the easy road. He walked away, leaving Sandra to raise Matthew alone, to sleep in shelters, to beg for toy sales just to afford diapers. She had buried every memory of him beneath years of heartbreak and resilience. And now, here he was, older, but still with that same smooth charm in his eyes. He had a clean shirt, polished shoes, and a nervous smile. "Sandra," he said softly, "I've been following the news. I didn't know things got that bad. I didn't know about any of it." She didn't move, just stared at him. "What do you want?" He lowered his gaze. "I want to be part of Matthew's life again." Her first instinct was rage, the audacity. After everything, after the surgeries, the therapy, the cold nights, now he wanted to show up, but she didn't scream. She didn't slam the door, because she was no longer the same woman he left behind. She was stronger now, wiser, and she didn't have the luxury of acting out of anger anymore, not when it came to Matthew. "I don't know what you think you can offer him," she said quietly, "but you don't get to come back and play father because the cameras are watching." Jason's expression faltered. "It's not about the cameras. I messed up. I know that, but I've changed." She studied him, unsure whether to believe a word, and yet part of her wondered, what if Matthew needed to see his father, even just once? What if keeping that door shut forever would only create more questions for her son? So, she agreed to a supervised visit. Matthew sat across from Jason at a small table in the hospital's family lounge. He was cautious, his big brown eyes flicking between his mother and the man who shared his face. Jason spoke carefully. He told Matthew he was sorry for not being there, that he'd been scared and selfish, but never stopped thinking about him. Matthew just listened, quiet, curious but unsure. Later that night, Sandra asked him, "What did you think?" Matthew shrugged. "He's nice, but he's not like Richard." Sandra smiled sadly. "No, baby, he's not." Weeks passed. Jason faded back into the distance. Whether from guilt or discomfort, Sandra didn't know. And truthfully, she didn't care. Because her and Matthew's life was no longer defined by who wasn't there. It was built around who stayed. Richard never left. After the surgery, after the scandals, and after every headline faded, he remained by their side. But he never rushed her, never asked for more than she could give. One evening, as they sat watching Matthew play with his toys, his little giraffe still tucked in his hand, Richard turned to Sandra and said, "You know, I thought I built this company to change the world. Turns out it changed me. You did that, you and Matthew." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from peace. In the months that followed, the Hallstrom Foundation grew into one of the most respected community outreach programs in the country. Sandra became a full-time director, helping launch women's shelters, funding pediatric therapy programs, and creating a grant for single parents of children with special needs. Her story inspired thousands, not because it was a fairy tale, but because it was real. She wasn't rescued, she rose, brick by brick, toy by toy, tear by tear. And every time someone asked Richard why he helped a toy vendor that day on the street, he'd answer the same way. "I didn't see a poor woman. I saw a mother who never gave up. The world needs more of that." And in the heart of that bustling city, on the very corner where Sandra once knelt on cold concrete with her toy basket, a plaque now stood. It read, "In honor of every parent who never stopped believing." Because sometimes, the greatest change doesn't come from money or power or fame. Sometimes it comes from a mother's love, a child's strength, and the kindness of someone who simply chooses to care. This is Stories of Hope. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got many more real stories that prove kindness still exists. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story too.